to side with the constituents, to side with the people, it has shown me the political will always be created by those most impacted by the state's most draconian policies.
Press the button to begin.
You're listening to The Social Primate with your host, Eddie Aguirre. Today we have the one and only Sandra De Anda. What's up, Sandra?
What's up?
Hey, thank you so much for making the time to come out here. Especially, I think after, I want to say yesterday or the day before, there was news that Anaheim had joined the lawsuit for the temporary restraining order, correct?
That's correct. House of Mouse, City of Minutes.
House of Mouse.
It's wild to see that Anaheim joined that lawsuit just because, like our team had been attending their Anaheim City Council meetings early on this year and basically telling them, like, look, enforcement is up in your city. We are doing morning patrols. We have footage from Ring cameras and videos that folks have been sending. And we've been seeing that Anaheim has been targeted heavily. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, the political will was there this week, and super proud of Anaheim, especially it's such a corporate city, to be able to take a stand with its people, its constituents. So, yeah, it's great news.
Yeah, it's awesome because that follows suit on Santa Ana. That they just, I think last week as well, they joined that lawsuit. And I think at this point, it's looking like it's setting a precedent in terms of what local communities can do to kind of, mitigate these raids that have been happening over the last couple months that we've seen heavily enforced by different types of agencies. And it's one of those things that it gives you some sense of relief, right? But I don't think it's the time for us to let our guard down either.
Exactly.
And to keep pushing over. But getting started, you are a Santa Ana-based writer, activist, and immigrant rights advocate. In your journey, how did you become involved in this immigrant defense and organizing?
Yeah, so there is a long journey and trajectory to that question. But so I grew up in a barrio in Santa Ana called Mini Street. It's on McFadden and Standard, but it's one of these historical barrios that has been under-resourced for a very long time. And so I grew up around working class immigrants that were Mexican, Central American, but also there has historically been a Cambodian community there as well. Mm-hmm. So myself, I actually grew up with La Migra in the community, right? Them picking up folks. I guess at that point it was INS, but they were picking up folks in front of the 7-Eleven when I was like 6 or 7. But also just kind of in that community, you experience this palpable fear of La Migra coming through that community. But also, of course, that community, I mean, there's like a lot of historical context around that community where basically those set of apartments were for Marines at the El Toro base. That's where they lived post-World War II. And basically right through migration patterns of more Mexican laborers coming to Orange County to work on the fields, on the orchards, they started moving into that housing. And then as this population is moving in, there's white flight from that area, and those white individuals, white Marines, end up moving somewhere else. And then right after the Khmer Rouge, then we saw the resettlement of Cambodian refugees in that community as well. And so that community, has been overly criminalized. And especially, when you look up Mini Street, you'll find photos in the OC Register of just dehumanizing practices happening to community members during the 90s, right? The war on drugs, Reaganomics, slashes to welfare, very similar situation to what we're seeing right now. And so, right, over-policing a lot of young people were being incarcerated. And it was easy to do because at that time, in the 90s into the early 2000s, the Santa Ana Police Department set up a substation there. So that was kind of ground zero for this police and ICE coming to a head. And so this community specifically where I grew up, they experienced hypercriminalization by these agencies. And so for myself, I actually had a really wild journey in my life where I ended up going to a boarding school in the South, out in Southern Virginia. And I ended up hanging out with like Republicans, and I was there at the height of the Tea Party movement. So a lot of hyper conservatism that I, of course, was not comfortable with because I was being excluded. I was racially profiled. And so for myself, I started kind of carving my identity in contrast to the politics of that place. And then I ended up going to college to Reed College in Oregon. And there, you know, the politics were more farther left, right? Like anarchism and Marxism were ideologies that were discussed very flippantly and very openly. And so from there, I actually, I used to have a landscaping job. I used to landscape for a lot of wealthy clientele out there. Mm-hmm. And one day I was like, I wonder what's up with Santa Ana. I think it was like early 2017. I was like, what's happening with my home city? And then I read a column run by these young organizers at this now defunct organization called Orange County Immigrant Youth United. But they used to run a like weekly column in the OC Weekly. Mm-hmm. And it was edited by Gabriel San Roman. And of course, the editor-in-chief was Gustavo Arellano. And it was actually an article that I read about youth resisting deportation that I was like, man, I need to go back to Santa Ana. Mm-hmm. And from there, that started the journey of myself joining the local immigrant rights movement. And then from there, that organization was part of the steering committee of the OC, the very, very beginnings of the OC Rapid Response Network. And what really caught my eye with the OC Rapid Response Network is that they were very horizontal in the way that they made decisions. It also allowed for people to plug in different ways. And so in a lot of community organizing, there are very hierarchical structures. Mm-hmm. And I saw that within the Rapid Response Network, everyone, including just everyday people, were considered experts, especially if they were the ones being confronted with the enforcement, ICE, DHS enforcement. So I started off there with the folks building it up, local attorneys, local community organizers, clergy. And honestly, the rest is history. It just totally changed the way that I perceived community defense work, and also even just kind of monitoring enforcement practices, right? Because, you know, in Santa Ana, there is a strong tradition of cop watching, a strong tradition of looking out when there's a DUI checkpoint. And so, right, being able to do that now with immigration is super important because ultimately they are the cops for undocumented folks, for non-citizens. Mm-hmm. And so right now we're seeing like a lot of enforcement, probably the most we've ever seen. And that's kind of what I want to get across. These agencies are always, not necessarily always, but they are present within our community. Even like under Biden, they were present in our community doing surveillance. And we know this from data that we've gathered through Public Records Acts. And so like PRAs. And so that's something that I think just kind of, I don't know, all things came together for me in 2017 where it's like, okay, I think this is where I'm supposed to be.
Yeah. Now, in terms of the OC Rapid Response Network, like what is as of today, like what is your current role?
So I am part of a co-directorship with my colleague Casey. I am the director of policy and legal strategy. So basically, you know, when you're on the ground, you get to see the injustice very intimately, and you're able to see the nuance of policies that are lacking at the bottom. And so based on, you know, the sort of hotline calls that we get, and then through the empowerment of these impacted families, we're able to see that there's a lot of loopholes in terms of deportation loopholes, in terms of policies right now, like the U visa policy in Santa Ana, the city's out of compliance, right? But the only way that we know that is by really sifting through these details of our community members' cases. And so my job is to sift through these details and determine what are some good policy recommendations to be made to different cities or to our county. All right, we have also supported state bills, but also, right, what sort of litigation should we consider based on the trends that we're seeing on the ground? I am a big believer that everyday people can become policymakers. You do not have to have a master's in policy to make policy. We have mamas making policy. We have queer, non-binary folks making policy that have never been to, have never gotten a master's degree. But it's just like, what's the problem? How do we solve it? So that's kind of my job.
Yeah. Okay. Now, the reason I bring that up is because, I've grown up here in LA for my whole life. And to me, right, and this can be completely biased, I guess you can say, but there's always been this narrative that Orange County and, anything past the LA County line tends to be a little bit more conservative. So in your experience, like, what does it mean to you to organize in Orange County in an area where it hasn't always been welcoming to immigrants, or policies there are it seems like they're tougher than they would be in Los Angeles?
Sure. In response to that, I would say that sometimes it feels like Orange County is in the shadow of LA County, right? And we see that through the fact that we have like a news desert. When there's coverage around enforcement, usually LA is the city that gets, and the county that gets tapped into, but Orange County is part of the same ERO office as LA, Ventura, San Bernardino. And so it's definitely a lot more, it's definitely a different landscape to organize in Orange County, because I had mentioned previously, right, there has been white flight from LA in the 50s. Those white individuals ended up settling in Orange County, then converging with these migration and patterns of resettlement of refugees. And so Orange County, to this day, still has many city councils and a board of supervisors that is very, very conservative. I mean, Orange County is known for its notorious anti-immigrant rhetoric out in Huntington Beach. And then recently, right, we had these white supremacists show up to a Costa Mesa city council meeting, right? Very resonant of the behavior that we saw in like Charlottesville, Virginia, with white supremacist movements out there. And so, yeah, Orange County has very, very vibrant immigrant and refugee enclaves all throughout, right? Like Santana, I think, is the most notorious Mexican and Vietnamese community in Orange County. But we also have pockets like in Irvine of folks from Iran. We have Little Arabia in Anaheim. We have Little Ethiopia. We have Koreatown in Buena Park. Just to name a few of the different immigrant refugee communities, they do exist in Orange County. And as we're seeing it now, those are the communities that are now being targeted. Even in places like Laguna Hills, Mission Viejo, right? What we're seeing with Mexican laborers, many of them do landscaping and things like that. And then there are little like Mexican communities, enclaves, right? Like Lake Forest, right? In El Toro. There's all of these like Mexican businesses, and they're considered to be out in South OC. And there's even like barrios in Lake Forest, right? And so I think it's the narrative work needs to be developed more in Orange County. I think like those that live the narratives know it, but I think trying to convince like elected officials about the nuance and the dynamics in between immigrant refugee communities is absolutely needed, right? Just because I feel like there was a lot of pushback and resistance, especially because our organization monitors enforcement, immigration enforcement. There was a lot of pushback when we started, coming to council meetings, coming to board of supervisor meetings, and basically saying like, look, enforcement is going up. Mm-hmm. And it almost felt like we were not being believed, even though we are very privileged and lucky that our community trusts us, that they call our hotline for all sorts of things. But they have the confidence in us to report enforcement. And so, right, I felt like no one was listening. And I feel like now I think the conditions, the political will is getting there. So we're seeing like cities like you mentioned, Santana, Anaheim, join the fight against the federal government. But right, trying to convince people is much more difficult, feels much more difficult. And I think also, as I mentioned, with news desert, we only have so many news entities that can cover these stories of resistance, right? And so that's also part of the narrative work that needs to be done in Orange County. And so it is difficult to flip the script on immigration and who enforcement targets, just because historically, right, in LA and Orange County, Mexicans have been targeted on a very wider and also in such a spectacle recently that sometimes other immigrant refugee communities are overlooked because those narratives are not pushed forward. Right. So yeah, Orange County is super interesting, but I'm excited to see the opportunity for policy making, narrative work, and a cultural shift in how we embrace and support our immigrant and refugee communities out there.
Earlier, you had mentioned that when you first got involved, it was under Trump 1.0, right? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Now, we're almost like at 9 years or something since that initially happened, almost 10 since he got elected. Between then and now, obviously, there's been a contrast in how things have escalated over the last couple of months and years. But do you feel like, since you were involved in all of this, did you guys feel prepared for this, for what was going to come down? Or did you feel like it kind of took you by surprise? Because it sounds like you guys have been building up to where you are now.
Yes, and I can outline a little bit of how each administration has changed in terms of enforcement. So, as we know, Trump 2 is much more abrasive than Trump 1. It looks like a lot of conditions and people are in the right places to make the right moves on their part. And so during Trump 1, what we ended up seeing was more targeted enforcement practices done by ICE. So they would target individuals at their homes. They would do vehicle stops. And so, the ICE's MO, where basically, they do some research on who they're going to target. They create a target folder. Then they do their surveillance. And then they basically target the individual where they believe that individual will be caught. Mm-hmm. And so under Trump 1, we saw a lot of that. I don't think we ever confirmed a workplace raid, but we did confirm many targeted arrests at the home, at vehicles, and also between this sort of mediary area between the home and the vehicle, which the issue of public parking, many vehicles are parked like by the sidewalk, but they're on like a public area. And so many folks have been caught in that mediary sort of area. And so we saw more of those types of enforcement practices. Yeah. And we saw, in Orange County, ICE has been using the criminal database to target our community members. So a lot of times in that enforcement, they'll say, this individual has a criminal record and things like that, right? And so that's what we saw under Trump 1.
Yeah, and so real quick to interrupt, and for Trump 1, they would have judicial warrants for these
They
people?
would never. To this day, in like the 8-9 years of doing this work, they have never showed up with a judicial warrant. Yeah. They usually show up with an administrative warrant signed by an ICE officer, but yeah, I don't think we've ever seen a judicial warrant. Judicial warrants take time to get. And in our understanding of ICE is very messy, disorganized. There's actually a litigation called Kid v. Nome that interrogates this agency because they get subpoenaed, and you get to see that they actually doctored and created documents when they were asked to produce those documents on the people that they have targeted. And also we've seen ICE in court, especially during bond hearings. DHS has the burden of proof to prove that the state has the authority to detain someone, but their DHS attorneys are oftentimes very unprepared. They do not expect that the community is going to pack the court, that they're going to write letters of support. And then we've even seen them in criminal court. So when people want to get resentenced or do something called post-conviction relief, where one can explore vacating their charges so they don't show up on those databases and are not considered deportable, they will come to the resentencing hearings trying to tell the judge in our justice courts that this person does not deserve to get their charges vacated, but they come very, very unprepared. And so that's something that we have been learning right through all these different administrations, that because you asked about the warrants, that they most of the time come with that administrative warrant that now our community knows. A lot of our community throughout Orange County knows their rights. They know they're not going to open the door to that administrative warrant. Or sometimes they don't even show up with anything at all. So, yeah, it's been interesting to track that they just have never brought those forth. I think LA may be different, but in Orange County, they just never brought forth those administrative warrants. And so going into Biden, right? So what Biden did is he played really into the good, bad immigrant narrative, where his cabinet prioritized individuals for removal with aggravated felonies. And so instead of this sort of catch-all that Trump was trying to push out during Trump 1, Biden was conceding and saying, we're only going to be targeting the most violent individuals with aggravated felonies. And so, doing this justice work, you end up seeing that on the criminal justice side, a lot of non-citizens don't know they have the option for their immigration consequences to be read at the time of their plea deal. So a lot of folks make the wrong moves over on the criminal defense side before they're charged, and then they get charged with something like a charge greater than what the action was, right? Because RDA, District Attorney Spitzer, overcharges. And so we started to see that many of these folks were overcharged in their plea deals, and then were targeted later on in the community, right, through some form of data sharing between the criminal justice database and ICE. So we've been working with a lot of these folks under Biden, but it was definitely a slower mechanism. At least to us, that's how we perceived it, right? It was a slower mechanism in which under Biden, we were able to negotiate more. We were able to negotiate more with ICE officers, right? Something that was introduced under that era was discretionary power for ICE officers, for them to basically say, I no longer want to pursue this case based on the presence of your attorney, your community support, etc. So they were given discretion. And so that was something that really benefited us, because while I understand that it is not ideal to work with the enemy, right, under Biden, we had to negotiate and basically ask for time on petitions, or basically ask ICE officers to terminate these deportation proceedings. So that was something that was very different. Now we're under Trump too, where it's right now ICE officers need to meet a quota. I believe right now it's 3,000 arrests a day, and now they're whipping out all the agencies, right? Right now, of course, like Border Patrol is an agency that in the last 8-9 years and even before then, we have not seen them enter into like Santana, into Orange County. But because they have to meet quotas, now they're accessing every part of the deportation apparatus to get those numbers. So, and just a little bit on the trend side, what we started to see in Orange County, right, is that after November, we started seeing more enforcement happen at people's homes, but then we started seeing enforcement happen in more public places. We started to see more visual and open arrests in the community. And then from there, we started seeing agencies like Homeland Security investigations try to also target individuals at their homes, but they were using it under the guise of welfare checks, where they were trying to do welfare checks on unaccompanied minors, and they would ask invasive questions or would try to, right, basically asking unaccompanied minors whether they were being fed, whether they were being trafficked, things like that would criminalize the parents. That was not fruitful because people knew their rights, people knew not to open their doors. And so we started seeing, the development of different operations like that one. The other one that we have been seeing, right, is like a joint task force of agencies arresting individuals in front of justice centers, so where folks go for their criminal hearings. So like the DEA, FBI, ICE sort of joint task force. But right, all of these different enforcement practices are very detailed, and they take a lot of time and a lot of bodies to just arrest one person. So, right, we saw that development from November into, I believe, late May and June is, when we started experiencing the raids with Border Patrol. Border Patrol, I believe, was accessed and activated because they are more militaristic, right? They're trained to seek targets on the border, and there is a very specific way that they go about it. And so with them, what we ended up seeing, especially right at the car wash arrest, at the Home Depot arrest, is that it seemed like they had maybe put a timer for like 3 minutes or so. And this falls in line with the narrative that these car wash workers shared. But they were basically trying to pick up as many people as possible in 3 minutes or under 3 minutes, and then go from one side to another and to another. And I know my homies over at Unión del Barrio had also shared a very similar pattern that they had seen in Los Angeles. So from there, right, they want to bring in the big boys, the big guys, the most aggressive and violent enforcers of immigration, and they brought them to our community. And so that's what has dramatically changed, this escalation that has been happening since November. We've been monitoring it and we've been naming it because someone has to share the truth, especially in places like Orange County that I think want to turn a blind eye to enforcement, because enforcement has historically happened behind closed doors, right? So it's happened behind the closed doors of people in their homes, behind the closed doors of vehicles. Now you're seeing it much more rampant and much more like a spectacle, right? They want to ensure that our communities are terrified. They want to interrupt the way of life that we have created for ourselves, especially individuals that Border Patrol, it's almost like Border Patrol, the way that they perceive their targets on the border, they wanted to perceive those targets onto the landscape of suburbia. So they're like, who is the closest targets that would be resonant of the targets that we see on the border? And it's like folks seeking labor at the Home Depot, car wash workers, street vendors, houseless individuals. These are the folks that are being targeted very openly by Border Patrol. And so that is something that we are monitoring right now. There is like a lawsuit, right, that's putting a pause on the roving patrols, where there has been footage of them targeting individuals just waiting at a bus stop. It's, if you're brown, it's like your target. And so actually our team has been doing an amazing job on buying out vendors, buying out day laborers, for the day, and basically saying like, look, in this moment, there are currently no protections. Yes, the community is working to get you those protections, but for now, as a rapid response team, we are going to use our recognition, our trust with the community to get you out of harm's way. Yeah. And I believe we have paid out 50 plus vendors, day laborers, from the first day of the raids. And it's like, you asked me whether this is what we have been building towards. And I think possibly, because I don't know any other organization in Orange County that is consistently trying to make their job difficult.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you made some great points there. And I do want to highlight that some of the stuff that you said there it entails what a rapid response network is. I think for me, I didn't really become familiar with this term until early June. And following that month, when a group of individuals in my region, Southeast Los Angeles, they got together and they started communicating through, various apps just to kind of communicate and give tips to the community. And one thing that I learned through that was, again, just the ability to pass information quickly and just be able to have people on the ground as soon as possible. And like you mentioned, early on, I was in one of these groups. And for a couple weeks, it was anxiety after anxiety after anxiety. Just seeing these tips and just seeing how they were surrounding my proximity. And just being under that mentality, it gave me this deep sense of fear, right? Because you see this, and I know people are helping with by giving these tips, but then you also start seeing how close it is to you. Mm-hmm. But I think the bigger part that we need to focus on is that if we're on the ground and we're, at least able to document, and I've had a couple of homies as well that were on the ground documenting what was going on, just seeing their emotions just go haywire and just try to decipher what's going on here. It did allow, outside of that fear, it gave some control, right? And there was a few times where they'll say like, hey, they're down the street. I'll get in my car, I'll drive down, and by the time I get there, they're gone, right? So it was those things that you're always chasing that time. Like they're doing these lightning raids. Mm-hmm. Before you know it, they're gone. But from your perspective, like filling in the spots that we didn't, like to you, what has a rapid response network? What does that mean to you in terms of what it can provide to community?
Yeah, so rapid response, of course, is that immediate response to individuals targeted by ICE or other immigration agencies. But, really understanding what happened at the site of enforcement. Mm-hmm. But also providing holistic response and legal defense support. So, on any sort of enforcement that is called into our hotline, right, we dispatch ICE watchers. Obviously, the ICE watchers that are closer to the site of enforcement, they will go, they will document 8 feet away from the enforcement, and they will ask questions, right? We started, we have always been asking, like, which federal agency are you with? What is your badge number? What's your last name? Who are you here to arrest? May I see your warrant? But it's something that one has to be super comfortable in their body to be able to do. Mm-hmm. If not, you can get very frazzled and overwhelmed easily. And so our ICE watchers are trained to basically hold it down, to ask for this very important information, to be able to document, right? But also to be able to take footage in case there are violations of the Fourth Amendment, right? Especially if the action takes place in a home or in a vehicle. But, right, being able to document and then entering that, that evidence into an immigration defense case, right? And so that's something that our team is dispatched to do. The investigative piece is very important because, right, our team has always used something called ICE courtesy call. So We will confirm what we can confirm on the ground, but a lot of times we will reach out to our local government and we'll ask city council to ask our local PD what they had on their radar. Was there a courtesy call made in terms of the agency that would be present here and what type of operation they were looking to do? So, right, we reach out to whoever it is that we need to reach out to at every levels of government to understand the complexity of these enforcement practices. Because from there, right, we create a lot of toolkits for non-attorneys to basically understand what they can do in situations like that, where if enforcement happens in a certain way, what are your rights during that enforcement practice, especially if we're seeing that it's a widespread tactic, right? We can share with the community, like, these are our tips and tricks for what we're seeing on the ground. And so rapid response entails that aspect, but it also entails in the defense of people navigating the criminal and immigration justice system. So we have developed, right, a tool called the first 24 hours. What do you do in the first 24 hours? We've realized that because this sort of work has sort of gone kind of unseen, right? Because it was less of a spectacle under Biden, that a lot of folks did not know what to do when their loved ones get taken in, right? So basically, we respond with our toolkit. It's called the first 24 hours, where we locate the community member. We try to see if an attorney can take on this case, and then ultimately see if that individual may be eligible for something like a bond, right? By mitigating whether an individual is a flight risk or a danger to the community. And that can be done through something called a socio-bio packet that humanizes and creates a narrative of your loved one within detention or basically any cage like jail or prison that can allow one to be released. Because when you are released and you're fighting your case, whether it's a criminal defense case or an immigration case, you're more likely to get the outcome you want versus being detained in a detention center with deplorable and inhumane conditions. So that is something that we teach families, and we have been having this meeting for the last 6-7 years religiously. Like, we show people how to get out of cages. If they don't get out on bond, we can consider something like a habeas petition and things like that, right? So we do the community defense side of work, where we try to understand the enforcement practice, and then ultimately we aim to empower those being criminalized. And so that is kind of what our rapid response model has grown to be. And I think under Biden, we had the sort of respite and the time to really understand deportation loopholes, and we understood how to stop deportations through many, many ways as non-attorneys. And then many of our community members actually engage in impact litigation, against Geo and Core Civic, right? One of our community members actually led one of the largest decarceration efforts at the Adelanto Detention Center at the height of the pandemic. At that time, we were organizing with folks on the inside. Our community member was bold enough to lead a litigation that would lead to the release of 800 plus people at the height of the pandemic. And, many of our community members have also sued the OC sheriffs when they have been transferred illegally to ICE. But, right, we ultimately aim to empower those most impacted by these policies to take charge and fight for the outcomes they want. There's some people that would much rather be hush and they just want to go through the motions and ultimately find a sense of peace after all of this is done. But there are some other community members that are like, you know what? If this is happening to me, it's happening to a lot of other people. And so that is how our rapid response network works. And this is just like the surface of the work that we do. We do just amazing work together, and it's mostly volunteers. Right now, I think we have over 100 ICE watchers throughout Orange County. Our legal defense, participatory defense team is 20 plus individuals. And then we have all sorts of little committees like the outreach committee, the fundraising committee, the policy committee. But all of this is just volunteers who have given their lives to giving their time so people spend less time in cages.
Mm-hmm. That's powerful work that you guys have been doing. And honestly, I know it's just, I'm just one person, but thank you. You know, all the efforts that you've put into this, protecting the families. And one thing that I wanted to bring up here is Migra Watch.
Mm-hmm.
Like, tell me a little bit about that, if you can.
Yeah, so Migra Watch, so we've been doing that, I would say, like, since our inception. Under Trump 1, we were doing Migra Watch alerts, and then into Biden. But, right, they were being done. There was much more time. There was a gap of time between all those Migra alerts because they were being reported at a lesser volume than they are being reported now. Mm-hmm. I think now there is a strong tradition and practice of people now whipping out their phones and taking footage. Whereas, as I mentioned, with Cop Watch, that's something that has already been created and normalized. But now, because more folks know about us and they're also, it's organically, they're videotaping. Now we're able to basically, try to get as many details of the enforcement action. We already have like a video. Our team basically goes through their uniforms, the vehicles. Mm-hmm. And then from there, we're like, okay, so team, who's here? What are they doing? And we use Salute to try to understand, right, the size, the action, the location, and understand who they are, what are they doing, who are they arresting, how are they doing it. Because it's important to share as many details as possible so our community can make the most informed decision, right? We try to do our due process so individuals can understand the full narrative of the enforcement. And ultimately, we want to know if people are arrested so then we can work with their families to fight to get them out of cages. Mm-hmm. That is the most important thing of the information that we gather. But the narrative, right, is super important because from there, people will understand how these agencies work because ultimately they are treating our communities like prey. So we need to understand them like a predator that will continue to adjust, change, based on the resistance of the people. That's what we have been seeing, right? Their tactics have changed week to week, month to month, because they know people are resisting. They know people are knowing their rights in their homes and their vehicles. And that's why they had to whip out Border Patrol. And so that is something that I want individuals to grasp, that they are ultimately extracting our community members like we're prey, like we're nothing. And so I think the Migra Watch stuff is super important because then you can begin to understand and, like you said, have power and control over what is happening in our landscape.
You had briefly mentioned about what should people be on the lookout for when they're documenting ICE. Like from your experience, and of course, stuff that I've seen on videos, whenever community members approach these agents and they start asking these questions about badge number, last name, what agency they're with, obviously we're seeing them respond or not even respond. Sometimes they stay quiet. Sometimes they'll give you false information, whatever the case may be, but it's really hard to pull any information out of them. Mm-hmm. What has been your perspective on that? The stuff that works, any tips that you can give us on that?
Mm-hmm. Well, it is absolutely our right to ask for that information. It is also our right to videotape. And so, yes, it has become much more difficult for us to identify these agencies, right? Because as you know, as all of us know, they're showing up masked up, of course, because they probably know that they may be doxxed, and they also probably internally feel that they are not appreciated and they're actually hated by our community. And so for us, yes, we have run into issues where we have asked for this information and we are met with absolute silence. And we've actually been met with violence as well, right? I mentioned arrests happening openly through Border Patrol enforcement, but at our local courthouse in Santa Ana, people are getting arrested. Asylum seekers with less than 2 years whose cases are being dismissed are being arrested behind closed doors by agents that are wearing full-on masks. They don't want to identify themselves. They don't want to provide any sort of documentation. The same, so it's been very troublesome because even our team at the courthouse has been met with a semblance of violence. Like we have some clergy members that go every day and they've pushed someone against the wall. Sometimes when we show up, they already have the guns positioned to basically show us oh, you wanna ice watch, you wanna catch footage. Well, I have a gun. You guys just have phones. Yeah. But I think really what's critical is standing your ground. Of course, it's based on your level of comfort and experience, but really standing your ground. I know when some of our ICE watchers go, one of them will videotape, the other one will take legal notes. And so, trying to have different forms of ways to gather information is really crucial, right? Because we don't know these guys are going to just throw someone's phone on the ground or whatever. But if someone is taking information down, pen and paper, that is something that we can introduce again to a immigration case. But I think that absolutely knowing that it's your right, holding your ground for as long as possible, and then especially if someone is being detained, having another individual, never have someone ask the individual for their name or a number or anything like that on the spot, because that can criminalize them further. But rather letting them know their rights. You have the right to remain silent, you have the right to an attorney, you have the right to not sign anything, and you have the right to let your ICE officer know if you have fear of returning back to your home country, right? Because what we're seeing is the usage of expedited removals. And this is based on what community members have been sharing, but they have been very pushy in trying to get people to sign over their rights and then get deported. So, making sure, look, these are your rights. This will help elongate your process simply by knowing your rights versus an individual that may be, pressured to sign something really quickly and then they are basically taken to Tijuana within a matter of hours. So that's something it's kind of like a whole triangulation of things what can do on the spot. We do it consistently over at the courthouse in Santana, right? We have our folks documenting, taking photos, video, and then someone is telling them their rights. We also have some cards that we have developed with several numbers, including the Freedom for Immigrants hotline number. It's a hotline number one can call from inside of detention, and all sorts of other numbers, right? Like our partners, Immigrant Defenders, for assistance on things like bond representation and things like that. So we've developed this sort of holistic response, and ultimately, bearing witness and letting these folks know, hey, we're watching, and we're going to do whatever we can on our end. And then we also have, when our team is comfortable, for example, folks are being taken at their ICE check-ins on 34 Civic Center Plaza. We still haven't figured out the pattern of how people are being taken, because we're getting an array of all sorts of different statuses being taken. But, we've blocked vans. Our sheriff currently works with ICE to transfer our folks that are not protected by SB 54 after being booked in jail. But, we do direct action as well. The first day of the raids, it was that weekend that LA got hit really hard. And then it came down to Santana. We started seeing I was actually at the courthouse. But basically, we got word that someone was getting detained at a Carl's Jr. on the border of Santana and Costa Mesa, and then at the Home Depot, and then at another, several areas. And then day one, we're like, let's just meet them where they're at. Let's go to 34 Civic Center Plaza. Let's go to the Federal Building, and let's say what's up. And we did a call to action, and it was hundreds of people showed up. People started blocking vans, interrupting operations. So that's something that in the defense of people, we must use all the tools that we have, and the Rapid Response Network knows when to strategically use what tool. And so, yeah, that's a little bit of all that.
No, it's interesting because, I mean, me talking just as a regular ass guy, like when I've been confronted with either, protesters being shot at by gas canisters or tear gas, or just seeing homies being face to face with these kidnappings, you start getting emotional, and it's normal, right? Like you're seeing this happen in front of you. But what happens along with those emotions is that, like we mentioned earlier, you're not fully thinking as clear as you can. And that sometimes may lead you to put yourself in positions that are unsafe when you're documenting this stuff, right? And we've seen people be arrested who are just simply recording that. And it's important, like you mentioned, to have individuals who are able to take these trainings or have workshops that allow you to take control of those emotions and seeing how you could be more proactive about how you use them, right? But with that being said, I want to see if you can take me through the process of once somebody gets detained, what can somebody do for their loved one?
Yes. So once someone is detained, especially in Orange County, they are taken to 34 Civic Center Plaza. That is our ICE field office. And we do have connections, right, to different congressmen and different elected officials. They can begin inquiring about this person's detainment. But, right, our first priority is to make sure that the family feels equipped to fight back in whatever way it is that they want to fight back, right? So basically, we let them know this is how it's going to unfold. Your loved one will be taken from here to the LA ICE field office. And then from there, they will be processed to one of the detention centers in the high desert. So the Adelanto Detention Center, Desert View Annex. And we basically give them the tool, the ICE locator. We let them know, okay, let's try to locate your loved one, see where they are at. Under this administration, it has taken a minute, or sometimes, honestly, sometimes hours or days to locate someone because of the mass processing, mass detainment of our community members. But that is a tool that we give them. We're like, you have the power to monitor your loved one, and you're going to have to do it, whenever it is that you need to have a sense of knowing where they're at.
And real quick, do people find their loved ones based on names, last names, and all that stuff? Or
yes. So like first, last name, country of origin, a number, or like full name, date of birth. But, that sort of descriptive information.
Okay.
And what we have found is because these agencies are so racist, sometimes they'll like misspell names, or they're put last names together. So sometimes they will take like a series of combinations of writing in the individual's names. And then if that person sometimes doesn't show up there, there's like a little trick that we found out through something called Access Corrections. So Access Corrections is a website you can use to put commissary on people's books. So sometimes if they don't show up on the ICE locator, you can go on Access Corrections, create a profile, and then try to seek for your loved one there. And so we use a mixture of those things to try to locate an individual. But right, as much information as possible, being understanding that it may take a minute, right, to figure out these combinations because, they always mess up people's names. And so, so they start there. And then from there, we basically say, okay, we have some next steps for you. Because we know that when people are in crisis, it is better for them to outline next steps rather than wondering and thinking that the worst thing possible may happen. So being proactive is very important. So basically, we chat and speak to the family. We understand what happened at the enforcement action, And then from there, we're like, okay, based on these things, some of our attorneys are saying there may be some issues in terms of violations, but assessing the situation at hand. And then from there, we try to get an attorney to assist them. So we're part of a group. We're called the OC Removal Defense Warriors, and we work with pro bono attorneys throughout Orange County. We meet every couple of weeks to talk strategy, to talk about capacity, right? And then we try to place our community members with these pro bono attorneys in Orange County because they're already doing movement lawyering. So we're already on the same page on how we holistically support a family. So, all of this is based on each case is different, but of course, attorneys always screen for eligibility for bond. And so if there is a possibility for bond, and an attorney can confirm that, then basically we begin asking the family to collect letters of support. Or we're going to, with your attorney and with your consent, let's work towards building what I mentioned, a socio-bio packet. So basically, let's try to mitigate two things: that person is not a flight risk, that person is not a danger to society. So if you mitigate those two things, you also mitigate these for criminal bond as well. Then you can successfully come out of detention. That is one of the easiest ways to do it. Recently, we saw Mr. Barranca, the gardener that was targeted by Border Patrol. He was just released last week. And we know car wash workers and other folks targeted by BP have been coming out slowly and surely out of the detention centers, right? But it is very formulaic how one can go about getting a community member out on bond. For individuals, and of course I have to say I'm not an attorney, I am a legal advocate, but for folks maybe that may not be eligible for bond, they could consider something like a habeas petition. Ultimately, the state has the burden to prove why one is in detention for a long time, and if they can't prove that, then an individual can come out. We have worked with several community members on these habeas petitions, but it really is on the side of the family to create the narrative of who their loved one is. Because right now what we're seeing is very gross, that these agencies are putting people's information and photos saying these are the deadliest people, we've gotten them, and it's super dehumanizing, but the community has their own narrative of that person. They are a loving father, they work at an auto shop, they're a music lover, they are a great cook, right? But this is the narrative that the family has to craft. And that takes time, right? And I know even each family is so different, the dynamics are different. And so, it is a very delicate dance, very delicate balance we have to strike, with what the family wants to show either to the judge, or some people go to media. What do they want to show to media? And so that is the first initial steps that we take. But ultimately, we have to aspire to have hope. We have to say, look, these are the things that can be done, and you have power in this process. And together as a community, this case does not simply belong to you. This case belongs to the entire community. And so that's just our first 24-hour sort of programming that we are trying to show the world, show our local community. It is very possible to get people out of detention because it's being done every week.
Yeah. That's like you said right now, that adds some hope into all of this because, and this is me speaking on my behalf only. But having this conversation, having you break this kind of stuff down, it definitely puts some control back and it gives you some assurance. And I think that's key because if you allow yourself to succumb to that fear, it's only going to deteriorate your mental health and it's going to affect the people around you, right? Now, before we start wrapping this up, I know we've gone over your work and what the organization has done over the last couple of years, but how has it been for you? What has that toll been on you in terms of what you've been seeing on the ground?
I mean, it has been very hard and difficult to, bear witness to this level of enforcement. And for myself, I know I recently took like a couple days off just to recenter myself, especially during this temporary restraining order on DHS, right? But I mean, for myself, I take the time to process. I take the time to find joy and to be with my loved ones because I am privileged enough to be someone that is a witness. I myself am not being targeted for being undocumented by the federal government, right? And so I'm going to use that privilege to protect my community by any means necessary. And so for myself, I think I have just been trying to pace myself. Our team has also been trying to be intentional about our work, basically, value each other doing this work and taking all of our community members' criticisms and insights to be able to create a better model every single day. And so for myself, I feel like there are days where I definitely have to like clock out and like cry for an hour or two. Or have to go exercise. And yeah, it's something that I feel is very difficult, but the community are the experts because we have been fighting these agencies for a long time, even before the creation of the Rapid Response Network. There's always been a strong tradition of deportation defense, community defense in Santa Ana and other parts of Orange County. So for myself, I am trying to take care of my mental health, but I also know I'm not alone. Mm-hmm. I know that if I were to not be within the Rapid Response Network, the Rapid Response Network would work just as fine without me because it is a horizontal model that can be reproduced and enhanced over time. And yeah, so that's how I'm dealing with everything. And like I mentioned, we're going to be having a party tomorrow. Mm-hmm. A fundraiser for the Rapid Response Network, and we're going to have like all types of like rockabilly, ska, cumbia bands present, right? Because part of this fight is also to show these agencies and show our communities that joy is also part of resistance.
Yes, I love that. And I've come face to face with that after this trauma, people come out, they join together to push back, to show that resistance. And a few times out in the city of Bell and Maywood and a couple of other places in Southeast LA, people will rally up, protest peacefully with music while they're dancing, while they're creating a vibe. And to me, there's nothing more beautiful. And I even got the goosebumps right now just thinking of the energy that when you're there, that you're seeing that even with this happening, you can't stop us. You can't stop us from feeling the joy of being amongst each other. Mm-hmm. And I think it's easy to forget and feel guilty about that early on, especially when I was like, I can't enjoy this. I can't go here. Like, it feels weird feeling joy in this heaviness, right? But like you said, that joy is the resistance. Mm-hmm. This is ours. You can't take that away from us. And I think that's the perseverance that we see our gente come out with.
Exactly.
So for yourself, after all this, up until this moment now, what have you learned over the last couple months in regards to the resistance and how people can keep moving forward with that?
That's a great question to end the podcast. I've learned a lot of things. So I myself identify as an abolitionist. I believe that cages beget more cages, right? In order to create cages, there needs to be zoning of land to create those cages, right? Just yesterday, I made public comment at the California City City Council meeting, basically opposing the expansion of ICE detention there, right? Because Geo and CoreCivic want to open up a detention center there, right? They want to provide an alternative economy to individuals in rural areas. And so for myself, I keep thinking, this is the time for abolition. This is the time to question, the purpose of and effectiveness of these cages, right? Because they can be utilized at any point of history to criminalize whoever it is that the federal government wants to criminalize. And even non-detention cages, right? Like jails, prisons. A lot of the people that we see in there are people of color, a lot of young men in there, a lot of women who have suffered domestic violence. And, basically those individuals that have not been supported by our system, by our systems of care. And so seeing that in contrast with mass detention, because we are also seeing mass incarceration through Prop 36, right? Simple drug possession is now being overcharged. So people with addiction are being criminalized. So I am learning, right, that these two things are coming to a head, and they are simultaneously working against the community, that actually these cages are not as far as we think, that they actually encroach through our daily lives in all of these manifestations. The other thing that I've seen, right, is like political will. Immigration policy has always been very tepid, and a lot of individuals, a lot of even representatives don't want to touch comprehensive immigration policy making. But the political will, when people want something, it will create the conditions for us to do those things, right? So this litigation against the federal government. In Santa Ana, we have one of the harshest, most pro-cop mayors in Orange County. And this is a pro-cop mayor that represents a large constituency of undocumented and non-citizen community members. So her, with her, there was a lot of pushback, right? As I mentioned, very similar to what happened in Anaheim. Our team would show up and we're like, hey, ICE is here. ICE has been here. They have expanded their efforts. She'd be like, no, ICE is not here. And it wasn't until our team, and we worked closely with Mr. Ben Camacho, we basically said, nah, they're lying to us. We're getting hotline calls. We have footage. We have photos. We have people sitting in cages that are testament to disenforcement. And it didn't take a PRA basically smearing Santa Ana Police Department because they lied to the community. They were telling us, they're saying that we were trying to fearmonger, and we're like, no, things are rapidly changing. So she went from denying and trying to stop any sort of transparency around ICE to now supporting a litigation against the federal government. And that there was different stages to that, of course. Our team's job is to shine the light in the darkest places for immigrants and refugees. And since the moment of shedding light to then having these mass protests in front of the federal building that then brought in the National Guard, to then having a packed chambers where for hours the mayor was held accountable by young people, by mothers, by trans and queer folks who were all, I know you mentioned this, that were, they were shot by rubber bullets. I mean, I was pepperballed, but basically our anger was met with violence by the police department. And a police department that Valeria Mesqua, she's buddy with, she's homies with. But to see all of the stages, all of the things that it took to get her to that position, to side with the constituents, to side with the people, it has shown me the political will always be created by those most impacted by the state's most draconian policies. So that is something that I have learned, and I have seen it, and I've lived and breathed it. And I truly appreciate that now it's not, we're going to listen to you, you're going to listen to us.
Yes. Sandra, thank you so much for this reassuring, this informative conversation, because again, just walking in here, listening to your stories, listening to the experiences, it's allowed me to feel a little bit more at ease. And again, it feels, you feel empowered after all of this, right? After you get this information, because you know you're not alone. And I think that's a big first step in joining communities together. From Southeast Los Angeles to Santana, like we're all part of the same struggle. We're all living the same struggle regardless of where we're staying at. So thank you so much for that. For people to follow you, follow the organization, where can people find you?
Yes, so you guys can follow us at OCRRN on Instagram. We share updates on what's happening on the ground, but we also invite folks to attend our trainings. And then we also have a Twitter at OC_RRN, and we also have a Facebook page. So I know there's more Spanish speakers and older folks on there, but those are our 3 pages where folks can follow us.
Thank you so much. And with that, we are signing off, and we'll see you guys next week.
Hell yeah.
They say we have to fight to be free. One day we'll have our liberty, but I just can't wait any longer. Tomorrow's not guaranteed. My people struggling to stay alive. I can see it in their eyes, fed up with all the lies. Fuck a 9 to 5, you better have 2 jobs and hustle on the side. Doggy dog ain't nothing nice. Cold world, think everything twice. The next move that you make might cost you your life. It's time to wise up, son. Open your eyes, wake up and realize you've been living a lie. You've been living a lie. Whoa. They say we have to fight to be free. One day we'll have our liberty, but I just can't wait any longer. Tomorrow's not guaranteed. So I send praise to Atabe, Wasabara all day, ready for whatever comes my way. I ain't got no time to play. Rest when I'm dead, paint all the walls red. Set fire to the TV, the couches and the bed. Flush my meds, fuck with the doc, said I ain't got no motherfucking time for distractions in my head.